about our good friend Richard. I have a lot of great stories and memories to share. I will try and pick just a few of them to share with you today, as Richard and I met in an AA meeting. Someone at the meeting said, "You need to meet this guy. He works at Cal Expo and he loves the Giants." I knew we were going to be great friends, and that's just what happened. We began to share a meeting together. He would get to the meeting an hour early to set up the whole meeting so there'd be nothing for me to do when I got there so that we could just sit and visit. That's what Richard liked to do. We would talk about the Giants, talk about sports, and talk about nothing forever. Once in a while, there'd be a big conference in town, once a year. Richard always loved to help others. He asked how he could help at this major conference. He was given the job of watching the cake. No one would touch it. Let me explain. This is a huge cake. Many hours have gone into making this massive cake. And his job was to make sure that nobody messed with it. I remember he called me and said, like it was just yesterday, he called me and told me that he had a job at the conference. He was so happy. And then there's the Giants. He loved the Giants. He would call me. I would call him up and say how bad the Giants are doing, and he'd say nothing but good things about them. I think he watched every Giants game of the season. We were at a meeting one time, and he left the meeting early to go watch his beloved Giants. Another one of my favorite stories is we had planned a trip to spring training, Stacy, Richard, and I. Richard worked on this trip for months. He had booked the hotels, the flights, all the home games, all the away games, printed out directions. Back in the day, you had to print them out. They didn't have on the maps like they do. To all the games, he was really fired up. In Scottsdale is where the Giants play spring training games. Going to a spring training game is an all-day affair. After the game, there's a very famous restaurant called Don and Charlie's. They have really great food, and all the baseball people like to go there. After one of the spring training games, we went there for dinner. A famous Giant player walked by, and it was Will the Thrill Clark. Richard said to him, "Hello, Mr. Clark," and Will sat down at our table for about 15 minutes, and we talked Giants baseball. It was the highlight of our trip. There was another time that I stayed at Stacy and Richard's house for the weekend. I lived up in Pollock Pines by myself. They had a spare room, which Richard called the Brad Clark Suite. He liked to make everything sound better than it actually was. Friday night were steaks on the barbecue. And of course, we had to watch the Giants. Then the next day was the state fair. When they would be running, we'd head out to the back of the track where there was a restaurant for the horsemen, and we had to have breakfast. It seemed that Richard always had friends wherever he went. Then over to the box seats that we had for the horse races. So many friends would join us for the races and tell stories and laugh. For Richard, it was more about the friends and getting together than it was the races. Then it would be back to Richard's and Stacy's house for hot dogs and hamburgers, and of course we had to watch the Giants game on the TV. Another one of my stories that comes to mind is Richard and my son and I like football. So we all load up in my car and head up to South Lake Tahoe for a day of NFL football. At Harvey's, back in the day, they had a theater room where you could watch all the 8 football games at one time. So imagine us driving up to South Lake Tahoe, explaining to each other how our teams we were going to bet were never going to lose, and they were just stone cold locks. The best part of the day is when we went for lunch and got pizza, and we explained how our losing teams all did, and how we have to make our money back in the second half of the games. For Richard, it wasn't about the money. It was about the memories that he got to have spending the day with the Clark boys for the day. If you know Richard at all, he loves to talk on the phone. I would be with him on numerous occasions, watching a game or just hanging out, and Richard would call so-and-so just to see how they were doing. He did that with others too. On many occasions, I would get a call from Richard just to see how I was doing, or he would call me and tell me where he was and let me know what was going on. We had a lot. I lost my place, I'm sorry. Okay, one more story. That's it, I promise. Richard and I both like horses. He grew up with them, and I've always liked horses. I once bought an Arabian horse, but that's a story for another day. Some of the best times Richard and I have were hanging out, going to harness races on Saturday night at Cal Expo and bringing food. If you've ever been to the harness races with Richard at Cal Expo, it's like going with a rock star. Everybody knows it. You get to ride in the starting gate car, and of course you have to go see his friend Gene, who always has horses that were running, so we'd get to go into the paddock and see the horses before the race. The best part was when the horses would win, which happened a lot. You'd get to go into the winning circle for the winning photo, and then it was up to the window to collect the money that you'd won. Some of the best times Richard and I had were those hot summer nights at Cal Expo tracks. When Stacy called me to let me know that Richard had passed away, I knew that I had lost a great friend. Thank you, God, for blessing us with a great man like Richard May. Thank you. He will truly be missed.